When I gave my first public speech, that wasn't in high school. I mean, my goal is just to go through the habituation cycle as fast as humanly possible. Facebook can addict you because there's a little light that turns red, but it's immediate. One thing, if you want to learn something, whatever it is, the fastest thing to do is go into a community. Like what you just like fundamentally, if we describe a behavior set within a given condition, then it's a skill that we can develop. And we develop skills through modeling, and we develop through role playing with basically seeing what other people do and then doing it ourselves. And so like, it doesn't matter what you're trying to learn. If you like, and it's just that there are some skills that people think reading, people think math, people think like public speaking, like these are all skills, but it's like, in what way does podcasting not fall into that category? In what way does having a conversation not fall into that category? Of course it does. And so I don't see it as any different. The only thing is that you want to have some sort of feedback loop so you can know you're getting better. But even just the fact of just like, after every podcast, if you had 5 minutes, you're like, okay, what did I do well? What can I do better? And then the next day, reviewing all the podcasts and then doing it again, like eventually you would no longer get fatigued from it because you'd habituate. And so for that one podcast, if you only do one a month, you're probably gonna have, your adrenals will dump while you're having the podcast. You have, anxiety, your heart rate goes up, you start sweating. But if you do it all the time, then it no longer creates an adrenal response because you were just accustomed to doing it. And so, I mean, my goal is just to go through the habituation cycle as fast as humanly possible. So I just get used to it. But like, I'll do a consulting day for 12 straight hours. And I'm pretty fresh at the end. I enjoy doing it. I like doing it. And so, and I'm not saying that like, that's how I've always been. It's just like, I've done it over time. And, answering questions even ad hoc, it's like, how can you answer questions? It's like, well, I'll tell you 2 different stories. So when I gave my first public speech, that wasn't in high school. When I was in high school, I was really nervous because I didn't know the subject matter that well because it was, Civil War, whatever, right? Or, pro or cons, affirmative action, whatever. You have to make some debate. Fast forward, I get on stage. My first stage I ever spoke on as a business person had 1,200 people in the audience. First stage ever. And I remember as I was walking up on stage, I was like, why am I not nervous right now? It was like very weird. I was like, I should be nervous. Why am I not nervous? I've been nervous all the other times I've spoken. And so I thought about it, and it was, I have been doing 8 public speaking things a day for years because at my gym, I had a microphone, same headset, big speakers that I could hear myself on. And I had a bunch of adults in a room that I had to tell what to do. And I did that every single hour on the hour, 8 hours a day. And then I still ran the business on top of that. And so I'd done that for years. And so when I got up on stage, I was like, oh, I'm just telling another group of people while I have a headset on about something that I already know about. And so that was kind of the making where you start to have, domain generalizations like, okay, something I did here also applies over here. And so it doesn't need to be a big deal. And so that kind of pattern recognition of like, what other time have I done something like this that it wasn't a big deal? Why can't I just use that as the frame of reference for how I'm going to think about what I'm doing right now? Oh. Well, I'll say this. You do what you have been rewarded for doing in the past. And that is kind of like my North Star of everything. And that's basically the behaviorist view of the world, which is people do what they've been rewarded for doing in the past. So, quote, bad people just behave that way because they've been rewarded for behaving in a, quote, bad way in the past. And so they do it. And if they've been punished for doing that, and punishment doesn't mean from an outside source, it's just something happened that they didn't want to have happen, an aversive stimulus. And so they would stop doing that, right? And the difficulty is attribution around the skill. So it's basically, where's the causal relationship coming from? And typically people will look at what happened before something, like what's the trigger, and that people use that word. But the trigger is false. It's really, the trigger is just the circumstance that gets created that repeats a behavior you've done in the past that you've been rewarded for. And so I gave this example when I was talking to Graham, but I'll bring it up because I think it's useful. It's like, Layla and I would get into some sort of spat about something, whatever. And I realized that I wouldn't get into a spat, but like if she was crying about something, and it didn't have to be related to me, but she could just be crying for whatever reason. I realized that I tended to get angry when she would cry. And she was like, why do you get angry at me when I'm crying? And I would get angry, and then she would stop crying because then she would get defensive, but the crying would stop. And so she inadvertently rewarded me for getting angry at her in the condition of her crying. So the trigger for me getting angry is her crying. Is it, or is it the fact that when I have gotten angry in the past, she stopped? And so like, okay, well, why did you get angry the first time? Because that would be the key question. And so what ends up happening is that if you encounter an obstacle that you don't know how to overcome, you do basically something called an extinction burst, which is a series of different behaviors to try and elicit the desired result. And so the easiest way to think about this is like a 4-year-old kid who's at a candy, the candy aisle right before they check out, and they say, I want candy. And so the first thing they'll do is say, Mom, I want a candy. And then the mom says no. And then the child changes behavior and says, please, pretty please, blah, 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 blah. They beg. That doesn't work. So then they shout and scream. And so all they're doing is basically flipping through the cards of behavior. They don't do this consciously, but they're just flipping through the cards of behavior until one of them gets them what they want. And so then when a parent has a child, for example, that has tantrums repeatedly, it means that at some point earlier on, they had a tantrum and then they got what they wanted. And so what you did is you rewarded tantrum having rather than rewarding non-tantrum having, right? And so when I think about this with regards to, what was the original question? So I can find my way back
Do most
home.
people know what they're good at?
Yeah. And so the thing is that we have been rewarded for doing things in the past. And so when people are like, why are you the way that you are? I would just say like, I have been rewarded in the past for behaving this way. And so I just continue to seek out those rewards. And so these behaviors have worked for me. And the thing is that these skills generalize across domains. So like working hard, for example, it's like if you do something where you have an extended period of time where you have effort before you have a reward and it works out well, then I'm more likely to repeat that behavior in another condition. And so people are excellent at Netflix and chilling. People are excellent at delaying tasks. People are excellent at avoiding confrontation. Why? Because they've been rewarded for doing so. And the problem with it is that there's multiple different types of reward that happen over different timelines. And if this sounds complex, it's like, that's why it's a whole field of study. But basically you have latency is the biggest confounder for a causal relationship around a behavior. Meaning, Facebook can addict you because there's a little light that turns red, but it's immediate. So they will better addict people to Facebook by giving that dot immediately than saying, I'll give you $1 in 30 days. Now, the people who have been rewarded in the past for waiting over a period of time or for working would do better with the delayed reward. But most people don't have that kind of reward cycle. They've never done anything for a long period of time. And so I think the laddered up question is like, how do you get people to try that first time where they're just willing to push out when they get rewarded for the work they're putting in? And the answer is, I don't know. I think at some point people call it chance, call it, they read some article and they decide to actually try something for an extended period of time. But I guess I would reject the original premise of the question, which is I think many people are good at many things. They're just not good at the things they want to be good at. I mean, how do you figure out what you're good at? If you think about skill acquisition in general, now this is relatively well documented, but like you do if I want to learn any new skill, so rather than saying like, what am I good at? I think it's sometimes more valuable to say like, what do I want to get good at? Now, people have quote proclivities, or they're like, oh, I'm naturally predisposed to these things. Maybe, but you can't control your genetics and maybe you don't know. And maybe it was just a nurture thing that earlier on, I remember I had this, and I will loop around to the answer, but I was in college and one of my favorite professors, he taught a class called systematic inquiry, which is basically like, how do you ask questions and answer them, which is great. And he's a super nurture over nature guy in terms of like his thought process around the world. And I tend to skew more towards the nurture side as well. And he said, like, all the things that you guys think you're naturally good at, you're not naturally good at, you just got good at them earlier. And so I was like, I've always been really good at languages. And I was like, I feel like that's something. And he just looked at me and he was like, I mean, do you have a parent that speaks another language, or there's someone in your life? And I was like, oh yeah, both my parents are bilingual. And I spoke French as my first language. And he was like, why are we even talking? And it was like it felt so, because I didn't see I was like, it was so natural to me that I didn't even think about it. But the very first, my existence was 2 languages. And so incorporating third, or even seeing English differently, was something that, quote, came natural to me. But it was just like, I had a different skill set that was repeated earlier on. And so to the original question in terms of skill acquisition, it's like you have a volume of activity that you're doing. So if I want to learn how to, play the trumpet, it'd be like, I'm going to play the trumpet for an hour. And then I'm going to look at other people who play the trumpet and compare what my notes sound like to compare what their notes sound like. And the fastest way to do that is to have an expert tutor. Like, I'm a huge fan of tutoring. It is the fastest way to learn. The second fastest is in small groups, and the third is to join a community of people who already have the same skill, and then you can basically learn through osmosis. And when I say learn through osmosis, it's just learn through observation of the small skills and skills that they do on a regular basis that increase the likelihood they get what they want. But I'll say one thing, if you want to learn something, whatever it is, the fastest thing to do is go into a community of people who already know how to do that thing well. It's the bar none fastest thing. You'll get many different feedback loops from many different sources. You'll be able to tease out what are the few truths rather than the mysticism that's kind of associated with the whole space, because every space has mysticism around it and magic, but there's usually a few core truths that are always true amongst all people for the skill.